Going.
Doing great, Rory. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, Mitchell Report Unleashed podcast, and I'm here with Chris. Man, you're such an inspiration in the wrestling community, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this one here. So I do appreciate you once again.
Dude, I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. Always great to connect with a fellow Canadian, a fellow Torontonian, a fellow Shure SM7B microphone owner. I mean, these mics just make you sound so buttery smooth, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. So, growing up in Canada, what was that like for you to make this transition into what it is that you're doing today?
Well, I think that when you grow up in Canada, you're surrounded by a lot of American culture. So, like, a lot of the movies you watch, most of the TV that you watch. I mean, think about it. You grow up watching Fox in Canada and you're watching like the Buffalo version of Fox or these other, TV stations. Do you remember, Rory, growing up and seeing like commercials for like Celino and Barnes on the Fox station out of Buffalo? So, like, I think that we're just kind of we're aware of everything that's going on there, and I kind of think that I always knew that to take my career to the next level, and I now live in Los Angeles. I think I knew that like it would just be you had to aim to try to get into the US. That was it for me, at least. I think that I grew up watching a lot of Much Music, like heavily inspired by Much Music and Rick Campanelli and George Strombolopoulos. And then when George went over to the CBC and started hosting the hour, I was like, man, that's incredible. Also, if your name's not Rick Campanelli, George Strombolopoulos, or Ben Mulrooney, that it's really hard to find a place doing entertainment news or TV hosting in Canada. So, really fortunate at 26, I had the opportunity to move to Cleveland, Ohio. That was my first American city, and been living in the US ever since.
Love it. I love it. So, when did wrestling become a thing? For me, wrestling was when I was a child. I don't even remember toddling around. The story's always like I was on my dad's knee every Saturday night or Saturday morning, sorry, and things like that, watching wrestling, watching the favorites. But for you, when did getting into capturing wrestling start for you?
Like, similar story. Like, every time we would go to my grandparents' house, and they live in Scarborough, they just loved having sports on the TV. And often, that's hockey in the winter. It's a lot of baseball or basketball or football. And if that wasn't on, they just have wrestling on the TV. And it's not that my grandpa was a huge wrestling fan. It's just that he wanted that like action on TV. So that was my first, like, I guess, introduction to it. This would have been, I think, the early 90s. So we're talking about like The Undertaker and Coco Beware, Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man, Repo Man. Like, I remember all of these, larger than life characters. And then a few years later, the late 90s, that was the Attitude Era, where, Stone Cold Steve Austin was a big thing, and the Rock. And that's when I really got into it. And I'm one of those people that when I'm passionate about something, I dive all the way in. I don't check the depth of the water. I don't check the temperature of the water. I just dive in and we'll figure it out when we get in there. And that was it for me. And I had my best friend at the time. We did this crazy thing back in the day called talking on the phone. Wild, right? So when you had
I
a
know.
best friend, you talked to them on the phone after school. And I knew that my phone call with my friend Vince would abruptly come to an end at 9 o'clock on Monday nights because he was a huge wrestling fan. And then one Monday night, I said, all right, man, like, I'll turn it on TSN. I'll watch Raw and we'll kind of chat about it. And then we'll finish our phone call during the commercial break. And I just got sucked into the storyline. And I went from watching no wrestling to watching everything, Raw and Nitro and Jacked and Metal and Heat and the pay-per-views and like everything. And I became a backyard wrestler. And like that was really it for me. I was also on the high school wrestling team at the time. So there's kind of this like two worlds, right? The quote unquote real world of high school and amateur wrestling, and the world of the WWF, which became the WWE. But that was my first, real introduction to it. And wrestling's one of those things that just kind of grabs you. And
So
here we
true.
are. I'm still a fan.
I know, right? WrestleMania just passed and things like that. So we're going to get into that a little bit later and things like that. But overcoming adversity. When was a time that you had to overcome adversity, especially in this development in show business, and maybe could be in an interview? And what did you learn about yourself, and how did you use it to springboard you to the next level?
I feel like that's been the story of a lot of my career. So, if we take it back, I went to Wilfrid Laurier University. I studied communication studies and I was having the best time there. I really enjoyed my classes. I lived with four of my best friends. And then in my fourth year, I woke up and I had this epiphany. It just hit me, dude, like a ton of bricks that we were going to graduate at the end of that year. When we graduated, we were going to have to go work for, the rest of our lives. And it's hard to fathom that when you're 22 years old, the idea of doing something for the next 40 or 50-ish years. And it was in that exact moment. Like I already was passionate about broadcasting. I already wanted to try to do that to the best of my ability. But it hit me in that moment that like I didn't want to hate my job. I wanted to, at the very least, have a job that I didn't hate. If I could love my job, that'd be amazing. So I reached out to every radio station, every TV station in Waterloo and Kitchener, and basically just said, hey, I'm passionate about broadcasting. Can I come in and volunteer and see how it's done in the real world? And that led to me getting a volunteer position at a radio station, like handing out like stickers at events. I worked as a volunteer at Rogers Community Television, doing everything behind the scenes from cameras to VTR to audio to floor directing. And then a radio station, 570 News in Kitchener, said, well, how would you like a job? And I'm like, okay. They said, well, it only pays $8 an hour. I said, well, that's $8 more than I thought I was going to make. I was going to do this for free. So that's kind of where the journey began of me like trying to like find my footing here. I ended up kind of talking my way into an internship at CHEX-TV in Peterborough by randomly emailing the general manager whose email I found online and convinced him I was going to be in Peterborough, even though I wasn't. And he said, sure, come on in. So that internship turned into a job. And then I was at CHEX-TV as a news reporter for a year and a half, where you're writing, shooting, editing, like doing it all. That led to me getting a job on MTV2 Canada, or like it was called Razor at the time, so a Much Music affiliate.
Yeah.
And this is where, like, to answer your question, this is where it really came in. I was having the best time. Like, I was interviewing musicians and actors and comedians and directors. And then this is back, I don't know if you remember this, Rory, but this is when Chum got bought out by CTV.
Yes, I
And
remember. I remember.
right, I was working for Chum, and now Chum had been acquired by CTV, and all of a sudden they had to figure out what to do with all these new shows that they had, and they ended up canceling our show, and we didn't really get much notice. And I kind of had to decide in this moment. I'm 2.5 years into my career. I've now picked up my life and moved it across the country. I moved from Toronto to Vancouver, and I've got to figure out, like, what do I do? I was literally just on TV yesterday, and now I have no job. So I had to decide, like, all right, do I stay in Vancouver and try to figure this out? Do I drive back home to Toronto, and maybe hope I can get a job there, audition for a TV show there? So I ended up packing up my 1995 Toyota Corolla, drove 47 hours back to my hometown of Pickering, moved back in with my parents, and then I made it my job to apply for jobs and audition for TV shows. And I think the biggest lesson learned there was to not give up. I remember I was collecting unemployment insurance and I was like 2 weeks away from this ending. And I was just like, I made it my job every day to check the job boards, to send out cold emails, to make phone calls, to try to just get in front of the person who might be making the decision on the TV show. So it was that idea of like, never give up. Like, every no that you get is that much closer to eventually getting a yes. And that was kind of a mentality that I took with me my whole life and my whole career. That whole time when I was unemployed, when I didn't have a job, is how I found an agent based in the US. And that's where the process started of auditioning for things in New York and LA, and kind of just made me go, there's more opportunities out there than just here in my hometown or my home country.
I love that you always bring it back to Canada, and things like that. And I think that even me living here in Canada, there's so many opportunities, but going to the next level, right? And things like that. And you show the ultimate sacrifice. You speak about, driving 47 hours and things like that. For you, what would you do if was there anything you'd want to do differently as far as where you're at right now? Was this always the dream destination for you?
I think that everything in our life has led us to be like where we are right now, sitting down having this exact conversation. So I think if you change anything along the way, you don't then become this version of yourself. So yeah, my story and my journey has been so different from how I thought it would go. And I'm sure it's the same for you and anybody
Hmm.
that's listening to this. But that's what's so unique about this. And it makes you the person that you are now. So for me, it's been like it was Peterborough to Vancouver to then Toronto, where I hosted a show on Sun TV, to then Cleveland to Miami to Cincinnati to now Los Angeles. And I still feel, dude, like I'm getting started. I'm just getting started.
No, no, definitely. So you say you're getting started. In the laundry list of people you said you've interviewed, a lot of popular wrestlers and things like that. In the area of showbiz, who's given you the best piece of feedback that you've
Mm.
used to apply to your interview skills, maybe business or anything in life?
I think that there's the people who give you advice, like they actually say it to you, and you go, "Oh, wow." And then there's also the people that you meet, and they you just watch them, and you go, "Oh, that's why they're so successful." So I kind of had both of that when I interviewed The Rock, and like you said, huge wrestling fan growing up. The Rock was the guy. He was the top of my list of people I wanted to interview, and the first time that I interviewed him, it was amazing watching him walk into the room. I was in there with some other people who were about to do interviews and like some camera people. There's a handful, maybe 12, 15 people in the room. And to watch him come in, and he had this energy that just like filled up the room. And he introduced himself to every single person. Hi, I'm Dwayne. Good to meet you. Hey, I'm Dwayne. Good to meet you. That was a really big lesson. And then later on, when I talked to him on the red carpet for Ballers, I asked him, like, kind of what you asked me just now. Would you do anything to change anything on your journey? Because think about it, The Rock's dream was to play in the NFL. And,
Yep.
for all intents and purposes, he didn't accomplish that dream. He played in the CFL and then got cut. And, now obviously he's had the amazing career that he's had. And he told me something that was so interesting and will stick with me forever. He said, sometimes the best things in life are the things that don't happen, are the things that where you think you're supposed to do this thing and life throws you a curveball and you end up doing another thing and it leads you down a better path. So that's been a really big one for me, especially with like picking up my life, moving to Vancouver. A year later, the show doesn't exist. All right, well, what do I do now? And all of that has led me to where we are now.
Love that you say that, The Rock. You know, you're at WrestleMania, right? Social media, things like that. And I think at the end of that match of night two, I think the whole world was expecting him to show up, and look Roman Reigns in the eye. For the people that are not talking that don't understand what we're talking about, WrestleMania just passed. So I was expecting to see him. I thought he's gonna look the tribal chief in the eye and say, you need to acknowledge me. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
things like that. So for you, WrestleMania, what was the experience like? I've always wanted to go to WrestleMania. I think all my audience that's from different realms of business, entrepreneurship, things like that have some wrestling ties would love to go to WrestleMania. For you, how special is WrestleMania 38 for you?
This was my 11th WrestleMania that I went to this last weekend in
Oh
Dallas.
my God.
My first
Wow.
one, though, was in Toronto, WrestleMania 18 at Skydome when it was still called Skydome. The big match was The Rock versus Hulk Hogan. There's something that's like palpable in the air. This is the wrestling fan Super Bowl. So anybody who's ever done anything in wrestling is in town for all the different conventions that are happening. And then anybody who's a massive wrestling fan flies in from all over the world. So the entire town, wherever it is, Dallas this year, Tampa last year, next year it's in Los Angeles, the entire city just gets taken over by wrestling fans. So it's big, it's exciting. It feels big when you're in a stadium that seats, 80, 90, 100,000 people, and you're all like there for the exact same thing, experiencing the same thing. It's cool. And they always talk in wrestling or WWE about those WrestleMania moments. And it's not always necessarily about the match or about the outcome of that match. It's about what's the moment that you can take away from that. And, it's so cool that we look back at this last weekend and there's a lot of those moments. And I think that that's what wrestling fans live for. And even if you're not a wrestling fan, this, like, I feel like it transcends Like if you could you watch a match or one night of WrestleMania and you're not a wrestling fan, I think you go, "Oh yeah, I get it."
Get it, eh? So, what was your favorite moment?
I think it was Cody Rhodes coming back just because it was so unexpected. I think that, if you had told someone, if you and I were to have this same conversation
Mhm.
3 years ago, right after AEW was announced, right after Cody's one of the big faces there as an executive vice president, making a lot of the decisions, especially early on in the days of All Elite Wrestling. If you were to tell me back then that Cody Rhodes was going to leave and then go back to WWE and then return at WrestleMania, I think that no one would believe you. So I think that that was the reaction that to his music hitting was huge, and I just think that this is what wrestling's all about: is those unexpected moments.
Oh, and that thing about Cody Rhodes, a lot of people don't understand the storytelling and the mic skills and just what he can do. I know you had a chance to interview him, and what did that look like? This capturing, knowing the bloodline, Dusty Rhodes, his dad, his brother, like that could have been that's probably just a story within itself. Not only a podcast, not only an interview, but like it's a story within itself. How was that for you, and what was one of the things you took from him?
I mean, I've had the great fortune of interviewing him a handful of times, and then when I appeared on AEW for the few episodes that I was on, he was my point person. Like he was kind of the person that would run down the script and say, "All right, here's what you're going to be doing tonight. Here's what we need you to wear," like the whole thing. So he was like super involved. I remember asking him in the first interview I did. He was Ring of Honor champion at the time. This is 5 years ago in 2017. His father is an absolute legend in the business. Even if you don't know wrestling, I feel like a lot of people know the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Absolutely.
And his father had just passed away recently. And I said, "What's the one piece of advice that he gave you that sticks with you?" And he said something that definitely applies to wrestling, but also just applies to like life in general. He said, "My dad would always say, maximize your minutes." And this was at a time when he was in WWE as Stardust and wasn't getting a lot of time on television. But Dusty was basically saying, even if you just get a few minutes on television, maximize those minutes, make the most of what you've got. And, that sounds obvious in wrestling, but that's something you can certainly apply to your life. What if you only have 2 minutes to talk to this person? Or what if you only have, 6 hours to spend in this town or whatever it happens to be? Maximize those minutes. Like, and I always talk about like intention. And I think that that's a big part of it too. Like lead with intention. Like if you're going into a conversation, a meeting, an interview, a trip, whatever it happens to be, what do you want to get out of it? And then reverse engineer back from there. Okay, well, then where does that begin?
No, absolutely. Well said. So your days, I feel like you have a lot of long days, early mornings, late nights, things like that. How does your morning routine look, and what's one of the most important things you do to set yourself up for success?
The most important thing is not looking at my phone first thing in the morning. Like that is
Mm,
paramount to everything else, because I think that when you look at your phone, especially when you're still in bed, is now what you're doing is reacting to everything else. You're reacting to those texts, to those emails, to the news that you might see on your news feed. And I think for me, I just want to have a clear mind and just kind of get ease into my day. So the first 20, 30 minutes of the day, I don't look at my phone. If my alarm goes off, I hit that, button, and then that's it. Like I don't look at my phone for the rest of the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes. That is the most important thing. And I know we've all heard that. And I would just encourage somebody, if you've tried it, just try again. Maybe just try for 10 minutes. Like right now, I imagine you hit your phone and then you swipe up and then you start scrolling immediately. And it's like, you're automatically your brain is going into reactive mode and you're being pulled in all these different directions. So that's a big one for me. Then a really simple one is I just drink a huge glass of water, like 20 ounces of water, to just kind of start to rehydrate, get everything flowing in the body. And then my workouts are in the morning, and that's kind of like my coffee. I don't drink coffee. I can't imagine me with more energy, so I don't drink any coffee. But so my morning is basically a workout, and then it's like get into whatever work looks like for the day.
oh, definitely. So we think about morning routines and things like that. I one of the things I admire about your aesthetic, right? And I say that in a way where I'm like, when are you ever going to step in the square and circle? Is that something you're looking to do? Are you going to step in the ring anytime
I
soon?
mean, I'll step in the ring as a ring announcer and I'll announce people's, heights or weights and hometowns, but I don't think so. I did train. I trained
No.
in Toronto for a
Okay.
few months. I trained at the Squared Circle in Toronto, and that was my goal. That was my dream at one point in time. I was a backyard wrestler, like I mentioned. It was crazy and silly and kind of stupid. And I think back like how lucky we are that we didn't get more injured. And then I trained in Toronto when I was 20, and it just, it just didn't line up for me. I was going to school at the time. So Pickering's the hometown. The wrestling school was in Toronto, and then Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. So as you know, that's kind of a line going from
Yep.
east to west.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
it was in the summer when I started training. So I was driving the half hour into Toronto to train, and then school started back up. So now Waterloo to Toronto was an hour to an hour and a half, depending on traffic. And it was 4 days a week. And it just didn't line up. It's like I kind of had to make this decision. I was at a fork in the road. And I love that phrase that says, the man who chases two rabbits catches none. And I wanted to be able to put all my attention into something. And for me, it couldn't be wrestling school at that time because I had school to focus on in my communication studies degree. So I put all my time and effort into that. And I always kind of said to myself, wrestling will always be there. If I want to do this when I graduate or later on in life, it'll be there. And, it has been there. I've been able to kind of dip my toe into the world as a ring announcer every now and then and interview some of the people that I watched on TV growing up. So I'm really happy with how this has worked out. And also, I'm 38 years old. I turn 39 next month. A lot of my friends who have been in it that are my age and they've been in it for 20-ish years, I would say that when I get out of bed, a lot less things hurt on me, which is, nothing hurts on me, thank God. And, for them, it's knees and necks and backs. And, you know, I just kind of think in those moments, I'm like, yeah, this all worked out the way it was supposed to work out.
Oh, so true, so true. So if let's say hypothetically saying you ever step in the square and circle, who are
Okay.
you gonna tag team partner with? And who are you going at? Who are you going at in the tag team match?
Well, I think it's got to be The Rock. I mean, if I can have anybody and I can
Ooh,
aim high, sure. It's gonna be it's
okay.
gonna be my wrestling alter ego, Chris Sharp, and my tag team partner, Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Against Roman and the crew or no?
Sure, I don't. You throw anybody at us, we'll take him down. It doesn't matter who we wrestle.
I love it, man. I love it. Before we get out of here, is there any last words you can tell the audience when it comes down to self development, pursuing this thing called podcasting, maybe even broadcasting that you could just give those shed a little bit of light, a little bit of tips to so they can take away and help them kickstart whatever it is that they want to do?
I think the most important thing is just two simple words: just start. And I think that it's so easy to get in your head if we're talking podcasting or content creation or YouTube of going, well, I would do this, but I don't have the right microphone. Or I would do this, but man, that subscription to Riverside's more than I expected. Or man, my camera just, my camera's not good enough. Just start. Okay. Just start. We all have these amazing supercomputers that live in our pocket that have fantastic lenses on them and amazing microphones on them. Just hit record and go. And stop getting in your head about like all the reasons why you can't do something and look at the reasons why you can do something. And with that said, if you're looking to get into podcasting, and you know this, Rory, your first bunch of interviews, your first bunch of episodes, they're not going to be that good. And that's okay. They might feel really good. And then you'll look back after like 10 episodes or 20 episodes and go, oh, wow, I thought that was good.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say just start and work on getting better every single time. Watch yourself, listen to yourself, figure out what's working for you. Talk to somebody who you love and trust and say, hey, what do you think of this? Like, be honest with me. Give me some honest feedback about this. And I think then just
Absolutely.
keep working on your craft from there.
Absolutely. I was out for dinner on
Were you at Swiss
Saturday.
Chalet?
No, it was not
I
at
love
Swiss
Swiss
Chalet.
Chalet. Oh, that is
I was
one of the
out I was out
biggest
for
things I
some.
miss about Canada.
I know. Maybe you could build one out there, no?
Ooh, that would be a great franchise to have here.
think so. You get it done.
So you're out to dinner.
But anyway, I was out to dinner for pad thai,
Oh,
and
very
I
nice.
got feedback about, when you do your shows, your solo pieces, you're good with the delivery with the mic, but go a little bit more deep into it, like deeper
Mhm.
than you can, and bring examples that you could give to the audience. And I took that and I ate it and I said, yo, I receive it. Because for me, I always think about my audience. If one person can say that, what's all the X amount of other people that are listening to us?
Right.
You know what I mean? So feedback is so important. I love that you just did say that. Um, for you and your podcast, where can everybody check that out? What do you have coming up in the pipeline? Maybe it's an exclusive interview. I don't know. And where can everybody check you out on social media and
Well,
YouTube?
wherever you're listening to this, you can find my podcast called Insight with Chris Van Vliet. And I think what's so fascinating to me is that we so often just see the finished product. We just see, Tom Brady with 7 Super Bowl rings, or, we see an actor with an Oscar, or an entrepreneur who has an 8 or 9 figure business, but we don't see like the path to get there, or we don't see the stumbles along the way. So that's what I really like to focus on during my interviews, where it's like, where were your stumbles? What happened along the way when this didn't work out the way you thought it would work out? And then I think my hope is that that encourages someone who's in their journey to go, oh my gosh, if that person who's accomplished so much is going through the same thing, or went through the same thing that I'm going through right now, man, everything's going to be okay. So Insight with
Absolutely.
Chris Van Vliet. And then you can find me at Chris Van Vliet wherever you are looking for me on social media. It's VanVliet.
I love it, my man. And I do appreciate you once again taking time out of your busy day to come on the Mental Report Unleashed podcast and have a great conversation.
Dude, my honor, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I,
Mhm.
I will spell honor with an OUR at the end too.
I love that you just did that. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Roy.